All righty.
Okay, I can hear. Good evening, and welcome to the special meeting for the Superintendent Finalist Interview, Day 2. Being held on May 12th. This meeting is now called to order. Mr. Walker, may we have a roll call, please?
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Blau,
Here.
Ms. Heinrich,
Here.
Mr. Rich,
Here.
Ms. Fox,
Here.
Ms. Smith,
Here.
I myself am here, and Ms. Williams.
I'm here.
All present and accounted for.
Thank you. I will now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. May we have a motion to approve the agenda, please? Mr. Rich.
I move to approve the agenda for today's special meeting as presented.
Support.
Motion to approve the agenda made by Mr. Rich, supported by Mrs. Smith. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Thank you. We're now moving into our superintendent finalist interview with Dr. Amy Kruppe. We will start off with welcoming Dr. Kruppe. Thank you again for your interest in our district. We will allow 15 minutes for presentation. You were asked to prepare a presentation on a topic of your choice for 15 minutes. After that point, the Board of Education will start asking questions until the 9:30 mark, unless there are no further questions, at which point we will move further with our agenda to public comment. Are there any questions before we start with our presentation from Dr. Kruppe? Before we get started, Dr. Kruppe, welcome. Thank you again for attending. I hope you had an enjoyable day with us. I will turn it over to you now.
Well, thank you, and thank you very much. It was a fantastic day. What beautiful schools and beautiful renovations you've been doing. What amazing teachers and just very smart and fantastic administrators. An opportunity to meet a few paras, some middle school teachers. Met all of your central high school staff that were in the teachers lounge and were able to greet me, and so it was just met some secretaries along the way. It was just a wonderful day, and the sun was shining, so what a wonderful time in Farmington schools today. So I really I had to think a lot about what it was that I was going to share with you today, because when you set an educational topic, that really left a wide variety of things that we could be doing on education, as there's so much in the educational system. But since we've been really talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I really wanted to take a moment to center in on some systemic items that I think are really important for us to think about and ultimately lead to you as a Board of Education around how you can put a system in place to really think about how you're making decisions on diversity, equity, inclusion in your district. And I think one of the pieces that we all struggle with in education is that we have a lot of changes and a lot of things that come into play. We make a lot of decisions about what we want to do, but the question is, how do we get to the end where we actually see change and we actually see action? So I take this back to my former beginning days as a special educator. And I think that has helped me to become a successful superintendent and a successful educator, because inside of being a superintendent, I'm an educator, number one. And so we're educating in everything that we do. And I would hope that if I become your next superintendent, that you would find that we're educating and learning together all the time. Not only are we learning together when I send you my weekly updates, but we're learning together also when we're at the board table, talking and discussing new topics. So I want to go all the way back to years ago when we started talking about response to intervention, and when we started talking about MTSS and talk about the problem-solving model. So we started in schools and special education talking about the problem-solving model, and we started making decisions for special education students and students before they became eligible for special ed by thinking about how do we talk about the difficulties that they're having and brainstorming that so that they don't end up in special education. So we started at the point of saying, what is the problem that we're facing for students? Why is that occurring? What are we going to do about it, and is it working? And we went through these problems for students with special needs or students that were struggling in classroom, and we worked through what we called a problem-solving driver, and we talked about this, and we made lots of plans for students before they were in special ed and while they were in special ed to work through change to help students either get back to what we called Tier 1 education at that point in time, remember, and be back in the classroom, to either go towards special education because we found that we couldn't help them achieve, and or to make a new plan because we found when we corrected one, there was another one. So this all started back many, many years ago in my experience years that I have that guided us to use the problem-solving driver. This is still used today in your MTSS work that you're probably doing right within your district now and all over the country. Then we moved with the same problem-solving driver and started looking at data inside of our classrooms and said, when we're doing NWA and Ames Web, when we're doing iReady, and when we're doing local-based assessments based upon our standards in our classroom, how do we change the instruction of our general education classrooms so that we could make changes in our students' instruction so all students are moving forward in our classroom? This, again, came from items of books like Got Data, Now What? So that we started looking through here and said, now we see that our students are taking, let's say, the NWA. And we found that students had reading comprehension issues inside our classroom, either a small group or a grade level at a time. And I would bet that your buildings are having data walls and data discussions, and they gathered that data and they pulled the concerns that they had regarding that data, and they said, what am I going to do to change the instruction at a grade level in the curriculum? And or what was I going to do to change the instruction for my students? Then they gathered data and they shared out all kinds of different instructional strategies inside the classroom, and I would bet they're still doing it today. They kept analyzing that data that they were doing it, and as they were gathering that to look to see what successes the students had in the classroom, they might have took some of that data and added it to the curriculum about how they were teaching, or they might have gotten rid of it and changed something else in the curriculum. So my favorite one always is that spelling. Students might have been struggling with spelling words. So instead of teaching spelling, oftentimes in school districts now, instead of the spelling list, we use word sorts to teach children to spell a different way, and it helps them improve. Some of us struggle to get rid of spelling lists, right? And we just added word sorts on top of it. Other school districts removed spelling lists and added word sorts in instead. So when we go through this problem-solving driver, we found out in our classrooms and at our grade levels, how do we instruct our children and how are they struggling? We used this information to create plans in the instruction that we're doing, set goals, and figure out how we improve our instruction. This is the same problem-solving driver that your teachers should be using every day after they teach a lesson, thinking about how did I instruct my kids today? How did they achieve? How did they perform? What do I need to do differently to create lesson plans tomorrow? This lesson plan, this is not any different than the RTI problem-solving model. As a matter of fact, it is the same problem-solving model that scientists use in their classroom or in their labs when they're trying to solve a problem. They have a hypothesis, they think about why it happens, they do the experiment, they gather the data, and then they try it again. This is an example of a problem-solving driver template that we use in our school district, that when our data teams or grade level teams get together, and then they travel that, they talk about why it happens, they gather the data, they develop a goal, they talk about why it might be happening, and then they have actions in the grade levels that they keep trying to do. Just an example of what I'm trying to explain to you today. But let's talk about why I'm really bringing this to the table. Because you are faced with the discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we really want to do is now we want to move this problem-solving driver as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion inside your school district. And we're going to give it a new name instead of the problem-solving driver, and we're going to talk about how to engage in critical collaborative inquiry. The same concept about taking a problem, looking at it and analyzing it, creating strategies to take action, monitoring that and thinking about and evaluating it. And then if it hasn't changed, we start this process all over again. How to move your concerns that you have about diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only in your curriculum, in your hiring practices, in your culture within your schools, but also within your policies and your practices as a board as a whole. And there's many documents and many surveys and spreadsheets that if I'm chosen as your superintendent, even if I'm not, that you can reach out and utilize this to help you make practices as a board, and also to help you in your committees, and also to help your curriculum department and your human resource department as you're making decisions. Let's talk about this a little bit more. So let's talk about identifying indicators of inequities, and now I have to put my glasses on because I don't think I can read all that by myself. So really what we're talking about that, when we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, about whose interests are not being served well by our system, and whose are. So we really need to be thinking about that inside our instructional system, inside our district as a whole, having conversations with our teachers and our staff and our community members, and maybe just with yourself about when we have instruction and our high quality instruction, whose interests are we serving and whose aren't we? I heard from a young lady today that said that she's been struggling with that. She's been wanting to have some changes in the curriculum. Having your students come to the table and talk with you about what that means, and having a look at that to see if that's a critical topic that you want to change. Having an appropriate response to the different supports in the building. What supports do you need to have in place? What materials and resources do you have, and are you using them through a lens of equity? And also looking at your teachers. Have your teachers been given appropriate opportunities to have training in the area of equity, diversity, and inclusion? And also, are your students and everybody feeling safe, valued, and included? I know that you're currently looking at an equity audit. I saw the survey that went out. I even tried to take it a little bit myself so I could look at some of the questions are under that. All of that will give you some of the first indicators in where you want to start and where you want to start looking, at least for a step, to have one area that you're going to indicate where you have inequalities happening inside your district, and one small step. You wouldn't do them all at one time. You'd want to look at one area in the problem-solving model. Once you do that, you would start analyzing it, looking at the people, the policies, and the practices, and what is it about our organizational system, or what about our system that's resulting in these inequities, and what are we going to do about it? Who gets to decide and frame what we're going to do about it? What is the purpose of us changing this? And why is it different for other people? Because maybe how I frame it, Mabel might be different than you frame it, and Donald, it might be different than you frame it, and Angie different than you, and Zach different than you. And how are we going to land on a consensus that ultimately what we need to be doing as a school board and a superintendent is landing on how it's best for the students inside Farmington, and how that's going to uplift them to be the best citizens they possibly can and the highest functioning adults that makes Farmington extremely proud. And then we need to talk about who's going to have access to our table to answer these questions to us so that we have all perspectives. How do we bring our
5 minutes
community
left.
in as well?
5 minutes to go.
Oh my goodness, long-winded. The last part, third part of this is creating strategies and taking action. Once you bring everyone to the table, you start developing strategies and think about how are we going to use this data to talk about the inequities that are happening, put it in our school improvement plan, put it in your long-range plan, put it in your strategic plan, and then develop those strengths and capacities and resources that we can bring to bear and change. And then you have to put people to coordinate it. And then, of course, coming back and monitoring this, making sure that you do this at board meetings, making sure that you do this at administrative meetings. And think about what effect is this on? Have effective feedback, have surveys that really talk about how do we support these claims that they're having? Are they valid, and is this reliable data? You're going to have to do this several times to make systemic change inside your district. Ultimately, this change starts with you. If the school board doesn't stand behind diversity and equity and inclusion, it can't change within a system. It has to start with you supporting it. We have to start with educational equity as a conversation, and we have to end as educational diversity, equity, and inclusion as a simple way of how we do everything, how we look at hiring, how we look at writing our curriculum, the culture inside our classrooms, and just our every system of way we do things. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kruppe, and thank you for that presentation. So we're going to start our questions. You had the opportunity to tour the district today and meet with some of our stakeholders. What stood out for you about the experience?
So I'm going to tell you, I'm sorry, I'm hard of hearing in my right ear, and I cannot hear you.
Okay. You had the opportunity to tour the district today and meet with some of our stakeholders. What stood out for you about the experience?
Thank you very much, and I apologize for that. Well, first of all, it was fantastic. I was in awe of your elementary STEAM school. Just the materials that you had, especially at an elementary and a middle school level for the students, the machines that they were working on, and the creativity that was inside the building. The administrators were able to share with me some of the thoughts that they had moving forward. So I just have to say to you, number one, your facilities are top-notch, second to none. They are clean, and the morale that I saw, every staff member that I saw was happy, positive. I really asked some of the principals about how did you feel? I mean, are the teachers stressed? And they said yes, but I could tell you that I could never tell you for a moment that they were in the midst of a pandemic. Everyone was positive and cheery. The students, you know, there were no masking issues. They were very positive. They were pleasant. They were excited to be in school. It was just such an incredibly positive experience. On top of that, I have to tell you that one thing that really stood out to me in Visions is that the opportunity that you gave to the students at Vision mirrored the opportunities that you gave to our general education students. So I have to say to you that as we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, there's some things that you are already doing that way exceed other places. And that is that the equity that you're providing inside that building, you should be celebrating very loud and proud because you have already started to provide an equitable situation for those students at Visions by making sure that when they have a room where they're building their CTE programs, that their room is equitable to the CTE opportunity of other rooms as well. I just have to tell you how very impressed I was. Your principals were articulate, they were dedicated, they were well informed. Your early childhood center was simply amazing, state of the art. She was very well informed, and I loved how she was collaborating the at-risk programming with the early childhood programming and with the GSRP programming. Just it was such a favorable day, and best of all, I enjoyed being with the board members, and the sun was shining.
Thank you.
So a lot of what you have brought up could be done successfully if you have full agreement from the board as to your vision. If you found yourself in a disagreement with a board member on a specific issue, how would you proceed? And not just a board member, but potentially different from the board as a whole.
So do you mean if a community member or an administrator, anyone?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, you have to reach consensus, right? The very first thing, and I gave you a 100-day plan, is to really sit down, and the Board of Education has to talk with their superintendent and really have a good discussion about what's our vision for that first 100 days. After we've gathered all of that data and spent the first 100 days of gathering, so here's the data, here's what I'm seeing in Local assessments, here's what I'm seeing in the curriculum, by the way, which is beautiful. I've seen that online in the Atlas Rubicon. Here's what I'm seeing in the classrooms. I hope to be able to see teachers before they leave. Here's what I'm hearing. Here's what I'm hearing from the community. So here's kind of the data that I'm bringing back to you, and here's some ideas that I have. What ideas do you have? And then you need to reach consensus as a team to say, here's what we're going to work on here. And here's the data why that we think we need to work on that and work first. You as a board has to reach consensus, and I have to be the one to help facilitate to get you there. That means that we need the time to do that. Sometimes that takes more than a couple hours, and so if we need to adjourn a meeting and go further, but we need to work together to get to that point. I think I said this before. You as a board have to decide if you feel comfortable that we have one-on-one meetings in my office with some board members. You need to decide if that's something that this Board of Education feels comfortable with. I'm happy to do that. Or if you want all your meetings to go through your president, how does this board want to react? I've done that before in other school districts where every board member has equal access to the superintendent and you can come whenever you want and set up an appointment. I've had situations where the school board only wants communication to go through the board president. So we would have to sit down and set up those norms and decide what we want to do. We can't do that we need to make those decisions about how you want to do that. So I always, if we had something that was in disagreement, I want to understand why, especially with the administrators. Bring your perspective to me, convince me otherwise, bring me that data, bring me that information that you want to bring to me, and let's talk about it. And also show me how that does or doesn't align to the goals that we have put in place.
Okay, and I'm sorry, may I do a follow-up on this? Specifically now, the board, if you have a difference of opinion with a decision that the board has made, how would you go about putting that into action?
Well, ultimately, the Board of Education gets to make the decisions. So if I've brought the information to you, and we've done that in an open session, and I've asked to go left, and you've told me to go right, my job is to go right. That's your decision. The Board of Education as a whole needs to make that decision. And I often say that. Some people find that frustrating. I bring the information to you. I lay it out in front of you. Here's the data in front of you. And my conversation would be this. You're the Board of Education. You need to make this final decision. Like return to schools, a school board's decision by law, right? So I'm going to bring you all the information that I've gathered and we've worked on in our return to school plan. I'm going to bring you the union conversations we've had. Ultimately, every month, the school board has to approve it. If the board says, Dr. Kruppe, I know that this is a decision that everybody's made, but we're really scared and we want to close, I might say, I might bring the nurses, here's the data from the health department, here's what's happening in each individual school, because I've been sending it to you every week in my weekly letter, and here's what I think. If you say we're going to close, I'm going to close. That's my job.
Thank you.
Dr. Kruppe, if you could please, for our viewers, summarize your 100-day plan that you submitted to us.
Sure. I'm glad I pulled it up here. So, we all know that everybody likes to have 100-day plans, and I think they are important to have a framework in your mind, but I think they always should be subject to change because the best laid plans change, and you need to be flexible enough to do that. So when I look at this, I want to lead always with students in mind, and so everything I do, I would hope that you would always find that I do that with students in mind. So when I look at this, my most important thing is centered around listening and communicating with stakeholders. I think the most important thing that you can do when you come in is listen, unless the board gives me a directive that I have to do something right away. Farmington is in outstanding shape. There are some things that you need to focus on, but you have a high graduation rate. You are financially in great shape. You have beautiful buildings. You have a plan going forward. So it would be in my best interest to go around and speak with the stakeholders, to speak with the teachers, the paraprofessional, each union leaders individually, to speak with both mayors, to speak with the chambers, to speak with the police chief, the fire chief, to get some parent groups in here, to speak with each board member here and say, how do you want me to handle that? To make sure I have a really good understanding, to speak with students before they leave, if there's some alumni groups, to Education Foundation, to really listen, to gather that data together, and then talk to my cabinet and really look at the different reports that they have in background and listen from their perspective, and ask them to help me put together a plan about where they think the most important steps are. And so that's step 2, right? So step 1 is listen and engage with the stakeholders. And there's a list of stakeholders to do, and I think I hit most of them. And then really start building relationship with all those essential partners, which are Oakland ISD, which I hope that I already have that in place, my peers of the Oakland County superintendents, because now more than ever, it is so important that you're working with your superintendents around you. And we have to be working together, because just because somebody else is doing something doesn't mean that you shouldn't learn a little bit about what they're doing so that you can do that and bring into your districts better. And we've been talking a lot about that over the last year, especially during COVID, and we have to work smarter because there's so much on our plate. I'm a big proponent of gathering and working together. I would want to meet with our state and local federal legislators, our auditors, our attorneys, our human service agencies, our health department. I really would like to meet with the Oakland County Health Department, unlike what I wrote in here. And then media connections. I think your relationships with media is super important. I have a philosophy: if they call, I answer. If they call, I also go online if they ask me to. I find that that's much better when you have a crisis, because they also are much willing to be softer on you if you are always willing to answer their call and say a few words to them. And I've had a good relationship with the media in Hazel Park. And then other connections that through discussions that I've been recommended to send to, or any that you've given me a list to go to as well. So I would say to you, send me a list of places that you think I need to go. Let's get in and get out there. And then the third area is talk about the systems and structures inside the district, the budgeting reports, how we do staffing recommendations, how we do the curriculum, how we are on the bonds. Actually, I have a lot of information already on the bonds. How's the equity, diversity, and inclusion process going? How's the equity audit going? Talk to me about 504 and compliance, the special education programs. What is it that they're feeling? I got a sense a little bit today. How come they're feeling a little bit like that they might not have the same attention? It looked beautiful, but talk to me a little bit about that. How can I lift people up? Because it is important that we continue to lift up our educators inside our district. It's been a traumatic year. We need to make sure that we keep our custodians, our secretaries, our paraprofessionals, our teachers inside our district. So we need to lift them up and make sure that they know how much they're cared for and they're appreciated and that we're listening to them. And then where are we in human resource with recruiting for our staff for the next year? And how are we making those decisions about how much staff needs to go where, when, and why? So those would be the meetings. I'd gather all that data, and then I would ask us to then the next one is I'd look at data that I can't see on the website, right? Like principal walkthrough data, special education data, graduation data, early childhood data, third grade reading law data, attendance data, and then gather it, see what it says to us, make a recommendation back to you, and then ask you guys, let's write a plan. Let's talk about where we want to go the next 100 days. And also, goal number 6 is say, I'm sure that I heard this several times today, we have a plan for starting in the fall. We have a plan already. Okay, well, tell me what it is. Let's make sure that that plan is in place and meets all the needs that the board would like to see for the fall. And what we have planned out that's not missing anything so that we have a smooth opening. And then let's communicate. Communicate that out to the community, communicate that out to the teachers, to the parents, and make sure that that's out there. And then we're going to cycle this all over again. Just like I said, we're going to cycle this plan all over again to make sure that we are getting to people that we haven't missed.
Okay, thank you.
Claudia?
Oh, it's my turn. I'm sorry. I'm on this. Thank you. Can you just describe your vision of the culture and climate that you want to see in the Farmington Public School District?
Well, I want to see what I saw today. And you know, it's much easier when you're visiting to see a beautiful students happy greeting their superintendent, talking to them. It was great. I had an opportunity to talk to 2 students about the programs that they were doing. That was a lovely opportunity today. I want to see teachers wanting to talk freely, wanting to find out more about me. I want teachers to feel free to reach out to me if they need to, principals feeling comfortable about that, an open door policy. I want teachers to feel safe and supported. I want students to feel safe and supported. I want the student that I talked to today to say, hey, I reached out with a concern in my classroom and it was answered. And I want them to feel like, even if they heard no, that they heard no with a reason why. And so I want that kind of atmosphere to be heard, that they could have critical conversations with individuals and know that maybe the answer is no, and they know why, and they're able to have that conversation back, and know that they can come back and have another conversation, and it might be no again, and it might be yes, and about how to walk that avenue to do that, that it's clearly out there. And they might come to the board, and it would be okay, and that there wouldn't be any ramifications from anyone if we walked up those steps of the proper way to go about it and have those conversations. But everybody needs to know their why. But I would love to see the energy that I saw today throughout the whole school. There was a tremendous amount of energy out there.
Ms. Fox?
Yes. Thank you thus far. One of my questions is, how do you plan to positively, this is echoing, how do you plan to positively impact the Farmington Public School culture through transparency and accountability to better impact the growth of our students and staff?
Well, I very much believe in transparency, and I think that's very, very important. You do have a website with a lot of information on there that's very forward-thinking. So the question is that transparent and forward-thinking for your community members and for your students? So I think that's number one. And I think that's one thing that we did when I came to Hazel Park, is that we didn't have board information online. We didn't have other items online. And right now, my website, I believe, is helpful for me, but oftentimes parents say that they can't find things. So I think the first thing about transparency is you can be as transparent as you want, but the question is it transparent to everyone that's trying to look at it? So I think that's number one, is that I think you have to be transparent. You need to make sure information's getting out to people, that when you're working on your communications, is that the right information that you're getting out to people? And making sure that you're very open and honest about everything, and very direct and clear about the things that you're getting out there. And so I think that's very, very important when we do that. But I think that's by getting feedback from people about, oh, you didn't know that? Let's try to figure out why and try to look inside the system. In a larger system, that very easily can happen, that you lose the transparency and you lose the communication. So if our topic is diversity and equity and inclusion, that has to be on every communication that we have about here's what's happening. So for example, currently what happens in the district that I am is that I communicate weekly to the board, and it's a very form letter where other people can put things in, and you know that it's coming because it's in this format. It comes to you on the weekend. That same looking format is sent to the staff on a weekly basis with an update from the central office and all our areas about what we're doing. And the building principals put their newsletter to their staff underneath that. So if it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, then an update happens right to that group, very transparent about what's happening. The board, not every week now, but normally gets a copy of what's sent to the staff, so they're informed about what central office is saying to the staff. So that communication of what's going to the staff, the board gets to look at that as well. I think sometimes they think I give them too much stuff, so they might not always read all of that. But that same communication goes out, and then administration gets one that looks very the same but has other things they need to do. So if your theme is diversity, equity, inclusion, all the information around that needs to happen and center around that so that they get that same information. It is important that your themes that are important to you and that you want to be transparent about come through. additionally, for the board, when things happen, you would get text messages if that's how you choose, or you would get personal phone calls if that's how it chooses. And then I think the other thing is that you have to be honest and open with your community when things happen and let them know what's going on through communication, through newsletters. So through COVID, we sent out way more than we needed to about what was happening. So now we've reduced it down that on the weekends, I send out a note of all the cases that have happened during the week and have a little spreadsheet that goes out to everybody about where they've happened, and then a little update about all the different activities that are going on. So I think being transparent and open about all the things that are happening is really important.
Can you talk a bit about holding staff and what have you accountable? Can you talk a bit about accountability, even if it's just on a general basis?
I missed your last words there.
I'd like to hear more about how this district will deal with going forward, holding people accountable here.
Well, you can't hold people accountable if you don't have goals set at the board level and policies set at the board level with expectations about what you want to see. So I'm going to go all the way back up with that. And so the first thing that I would recommend is that we read together and talk together. There's a wonderful book by Fullen that talks about board leadership that maybe we might want to read together and talk about how to work and be together. Our board finished it. And we might want to talk about that and then talk about what are those things that you feel that people haven't been held accountable for before, and why do we think that might be, and then let's take a look at that. And so oftentimes when something happens, there's a reason why, and I would ask a lot of questions about why that happened and what that is, and then let's look and see why that happened before. You know, there's expectations. So for example, today someone mentioned about rolling out Canvas, that not everyone's using it. So my question would be, well, if we as a system agreed, and everybody agreed systemically to roll out Canvas, everybody should be using Canvas. If we're not, the question is why? Is it because somebody doesn't know how? Is it because somebody doesn't have internet? Is it because it's been too difficult and we didn't roll it out correctly? What is that? I can't answer that, and I couldn't answer that for that parent either. I wouldn't just go and say, you're not doing it, and assume that they're not doing it because they're just refusing to do it. I would first say, why aren't you doing it, and what can we do to help to support you first? If they continue to refuse to do it, and that was an agreement at the board level that you purchased it, you signed it, and part of that underneath is here's where the parameters that we agreed to do it, a letter, here's the rollout, here's what we said we would do it by January 5th, and that all buildings, the elementary would use it by this date, here's where we said we would do it, then it's an expectation from the board that we're using it. And so let's talk about why we failed in that endeavor. And it could be that we're having system failures. I'm not making any judgment about Canvas. I'm just saying that was a mention to
Sure.
me. So when we do something at one elementary, all the elementaries should be doing it. If we're not, I'd have to ask why. So if this elementary gets, classroom libraries that are culturally relevant, then all the buildings should get classroom libraries that are culturally relevant. If one classroom changes their math curriculum, all the elementary should change it. So, and it should be expected that they're implementing it with fidelity at that point in time. And if they're not, what professional development do we need to add to that? If it's a consistent issue, then I need to talk with HR to ask what policies and procedures have we put in place to support that person, or what are those steps that we needed to do otherwise?
Thank you.
But your board has to stand behind those decisions that you make. It's really important. I can't emphasize that enough, the importance of a really strong collaborative board around the decisions that you make.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Kruppe, FPS students feel connected to schools beyond the traditional academic areas, including athletics, the arts, and other student activities. How have you created and sustained opportunities for students so they can maintain and grow these connections?
Well, I think at Hazel Park, it's something that we've wanted to continue to grow, but I think we've struggled to grow. We did add robotics to Hazel Park that haven't been here before, and so we were really excited to add that all the way from the elementary to the high school level. And so that has been a blessing of something that we've added. When we added the STEAM and STEM K through 12 through the school district, we were able to add and get grants for robotics K through 12. So that was very, very exciting. We do have sports, but we've watched sports participation dwindle, which is one of the reasons why we were trying to get a Boys and Girls Club, so more students in the Hazel Park area had the opportunity to do things outside the school day, and maybe would lead also into sports participation moving forward. In our personal life, my husband and I did baseball back in the Naperville area, ran a for-profit baseball organization for students, and oftentimes paid for students that didn't have the opportunity to do some of the other ones in the Naperville area. So we were very involved and believe in sports. I think that's very important. And at the school district that I was at before, they had a band and orchestra in the elementary school. And so I always made sure that people were always worried that that was something I would cut, and I would say absolutely not. I believe that music, band, choir, all is very important. I believe today I also made a promise to one of the principals that if I did have the job, that I would be singing with him at the next time he was singing with students, as I was a voice and math major at Albion College before I became a special educator. So, it is something that we've been driving to try to expand and find. As a matter of fact, I was just talking with the union leader the other day about how to try to find other after-school clubs to get kids involved.
Thank you.
Good evening again, Dr. Kruppe. What is your knowledge of Equity Opportunity Schools, which is EOS, AVID, and other programs designed to help address opportunity gaps and/or support underrepresented students in higher level courses? Where have you leveraged these in the past?
So I've not been involved with Equity Opportunity Schools or AVID, but I can tell you that we pulled out of CASA for the simple fact that we wanted the opportunity for our students to have more AP classes in our school district. And so in order to do that, we needed to financially be able to offer those AP classes in our own school district. And so we ended up with going from 4 to, I believe we have 13 now, AP classes. We know that the best way to move our students forward is make sure that they have access to higher level opportunities inside the school district. And we also then made sure that we updated the curriculum 9 through 12 to make sure that that was more college-ready curriculum. As a matter of fact, our curriculum was, Dr. Postel is working with Oakland Community College showing our curriculum, because we're trying to find that differential between students that are going on into high school, are going on to community college, and whether or not they're having to retake classes in some of our local school districts in Oakland County. And they were very impressed that we too are using the Understanding by Design and also lifting that up. And we went away from workbooks and went on to reading novels in English and doing other things such as that. And so our belief was, right, that our students, all students, and we have 50% students of color, 50% white, they need access to high quality, rigorous instruction in order to be successful. And so that was our way of closing the opportunity gap. So I don't have experience in either of those two items, but I can tell you that we've been working rigorously to try to find other opportunities for our students.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Mr. Walker?
Dr. Kruppe, you mentioned the increase in AP classes. How does that, what is your thoughts that surround international baccalaureate programming and students' access to that, as well as career and technical education as options for students as they graduate?
Well, one of the outstanding things you have in Farmington is the wonderful opportunities and the selections that you have. And so we talked a lot about the IB programming here in Farmington, and I'm very familiar with it. My daughter attended Royal Oak for a short period of time with the IB programming at the elementary level, and the creativity and the critical thinking skills that come out of IB is just really outstanding. But I think parents should have choices and students should have choices, and we should introduce that, and we should be celebrating that more in Farmington Hills and really getting that information out to other individuals and other communities about the outstanding programs that you have and the successes that the students have had once they leave them, even from the International Academy, which, Zach, you were at, or IB program and where they've gone after that. And then the career and technical education. I was shocked to hear the amount of CTE programs that you had here in Farmington that, just being a neighbor district, I had no idea about. And I really kind of said, how did you get all these programs? And you are also still going to Oakland Schools programs. That is simply amazing, and our students should be celebrating them. We should be continuing to grow them. We just added a welding program this year for next year, and so we've struggled to add those for a long period of time, but they're incredibly important. I think I also shared that we developed a program with Chrysler UAW, School to Work program. Very proud of that program, and that program will be starting back again in the fall after the negotiations have been over with the union, and they've worked through those programs. Our students have a 2-year opportunity to work directly with Chrysler UAW and then potentially have a job at Chrysler after that, which about 50% of the students do. We also have wood shop back again in Hazel Park. We didn't have any of that when I came. And we're hoping also to open up a firefighter academy. So, choices are really important for our students, and we need to give them all the avenues that we possibly can to be successful. And Farmington has done a wonderful job. I just adored the fact that you have auto shop in there. I thought that was outstanding. And for the younger students in the STEAM Academy too, just super impressive at the opportunities and availabilities that you had for them as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Rich.
Thank you. So my question is, what potential concerns do you have about this position in Farmington Public Schools?
Well, the most important thing for me is to find a Board of Education that will walk with me on diversity, equity, and inclusion, that wants to have a long-term commitment to a superintendent, that wants to have a long-term commitment back, that wants to develop a long-term relationship that lifts a school even higher than it already is. And so the largest concern that I have is that a school board might not be ready for that big diversity, equity, inclusion walk, because I think that's a long haul. We've been working on that for 6 years. We've worked with Jay Marks. We've worked with the Midwest Equity Center, and I know for sure that it's not only the teachers that have to lift that up, but the school board that has to lift that up. And so I think that's my largest concern. Other than that, I think I don't have a large concern. I've been in a large school district before, much larger than Farmington, at a very young age, and so I navigated that as assistant superintendent of special ed, working with all the building principals, and so I was trained that way. I've worked in a small school district, and when I was special ed co-op director, which is much like the ISD, I worked with 14 school districts, which is larger than Farmington. And so I was able to navigate that, and I had many more bosses than sitting here, because not only did I have the school board that was from each school district, I had all the superintendents as my boss as well. So try having superintendents as your bosses and school board members as your boss. So you had to navigate that a little as well. That was not always easy to tiptoe around. So I think that I'm not worried. I'm more concerned about the buy-in from the things that I think are important to move Farmington forward for its students, and lifting that up.
Mrs. Smith.
The country has dealt with the pandemic, and the country has also dealt with the pandemic of systemic racism. During the time of the death of George Floyd, we had students through our community, throughout our high schools, 170 to be exact, to write a letter to tell what they had gone through as far as racial discrimination, not only African American students of all ethnicities. How would you, as a superintendent approach that with the students of this community and talk to them regarding this, the letter that they wrote and asked to be listened to?
I think the killing of George Floyd was very controversial at that time, and I think how I handle it now might have been different then. I think I've learned a lot of the way, along the way, of listening critically, and so I think I would bring them forth and listen. I've listened to many of my administrators that are very close to me to hear things that I've never heard before, that I would have never thought of, that they walked through. I've done the diversity walk, and I've seen that, and that hurt to see some of my close friends and turn around. But there's nothing like some of the conversations that came out after the death of George Floyd. And so I would listen. I would bring them in and listen and ask other people. We did a fishbowl last year of our junior high and high school students to play to our teachers to listen about what they feel is happening in the classroom. Hearing what they feel about racism, those words are powerful, and I think that that would be very powerful as well. I just finished the book, The Color of Law, and I have to tell you that one of the things I do is we have 9 acres and I mow my yard, and I listen to that mowing, and that is a powerful, powerful book if you want to listen to the systemic racism that has happened in our country. And there's things that I never knew about as it deals with deeds to property and individuals trying to get loans and things that go even deeper that hurt my soul in ways that I've never imagined. And so each day it's a learning experience, and I would like to be able to hear what's happened to the students and talk about how could we put actions in place to rectify that.
Thank you.
Dr. Blau, and then Mr. Walker.
If you had a magic wand and you could change K-12 public education single-handedly, what would be some of the changes you would like to see happening in our classrooms, in our schools?
It's so interesting because a colleague of mine, colleague of ours, did several proposals to individuals to try to develop that school in Hazel Park to get financing for a school like that. It would be one of training of teachers, labs of teachers, where teachers had time to come in and observe each other, to grow together. Ones that is critical thinking, project-based learning. I love today over at the STEAM lab that the students were building the courtyard, and they've been building it for 4 years, all that research. Our schools should be focused with that creative learning that was happening there, that if you're going to build a new school or you're going to do something, that they had their fingertips on that. Students are amazingly smart, right? And so if we are getting ready to remodel a school, why shouldn't our high school students be thinking about it? Why shouldn't they be thinking about the materials that you're picking out or brainstorming along those lines? Why shouldn't they be thinking about what it takes to go out to bid and what it takes to put that spreadsheet together? They should be involved in that critical thinking and design, that free play base, the teachers that can spend time planning together, talking together, brainstorming together, observing each other. Students can progress at the individual needs that they need to and get all the support that they need. Pathways where high school students can be out in the community doing community service, interning and sampling and all the different jobs that they might want to do so that when they leave here, they have a really good grasp of where they want to go, where they don't want to go. The ability for them to have CTE where they want it, or if they don't want it, or at least sample some of that. We do need to redesign what we do in schools. And I would like to have a budget where we could travel over the country and see how other people are doing it and bring the best of all of that back and put it together here.
Thank you.
Dr. Kruppe, we have had some unfortunately high-profile incidents with our district in the past couple of years. Can you give us any examples or an example of how you've handled crises within your leadership, within your district, and how you've been able to confront that and possibly the outcome?
Sure. We had an incident with Farmington and with North Farmington on the basketball court. And we worked through that. We worked through that with our board, and we worked through that with the community, and we worked through that with our families. And that's how I would work through those issues here. We sit down, we worked with the media to avert that crisis by bringing the media inside and experiencing that with them, and letting them see the cameras about what was going on, to really see what was happening, because they were not really kind of showing what was happening. And it really was a student that had started something, and then it grew to something else. And then we worked with all the students and families, went back and checked our safeguards to see what was going on. And that's kind of how we've handled it. We had a food issue, where there was some moldy muffins, and that became a big media issue that was all over the place. And again, same thing. We developed a food committee where the head of the food service and our principal met with kids on a regular basis to talk about the food and why it was there. I brought the news in. We sat in the cafeteria. We ate food together. We walked through the food lines. We talked to kids. We worked through it. I think you have to deal with these issues head on. And I know some of the issues that you've been talking about, and I think the same thing. You talk to the people that have the concern. You try to understand the concern. I think you as a board might want to address the concern and understand more about it by allowing those parents to hear from the superintendent, and then let's investigate it. Let's find out what's going on here, and then maybe we need to educate the larger public about what that issue is. I educated the public about what our food is like in Hazel Park. I brought them in, let them see. I had parent meetings. They could come and talk to me, tell me all their concerns. Then we had a committee and let kids share about the concerns, and then tried to change some of the food quality in the school. By the way, the muffin was moldy because they popped the thing open, and that happens sometimes in food, but it doesn't take away the concern that someone had something of sub-quality that they were upset about. It was big to them. It doesn't matter how big or how small the issue is. We need to address it, talk to the people, and your superintendent needs to be out there in the middle of it, supporting it.
Thank you.
As a time check, we have about 5 to 7 minutes. I know Mrs. Heinrich has a question.
Yes, thank you. I'm just trying to whittle down my questions. There's a teacher shortage. Talk about, qualified teachers. Farmington is a very richly diverse community. We have a lot of ethnic groups. We have a lot of languages spoken. We have a commitment to hire a diverse staff, but it's known that we're lacking and we need more diverse staff. So how will you attract and keep qualified staff, and what will you do to actually bring about this change and bring in a diverse staff so that our student populations can actually see adults that they can identify with?
Absolutely. Well, I know that this is something we all struggle with, but we all have to get better. And so one of the things that Hazel Park is about to be involved in is the recruitment of African-American men into the programming of education, starting at the junior high and senior high level. At the 11th and 12th grade level, where they would be recruited and taught about education and take some classes, and then move on to the college level with some scholarships through a nationwide program. And then while they were in college in the summertime, they would work with our at-risk students, and we would pay them as a school district for doing that. and then they would come back and teach in Hazel Park. We're going to have to come up with long-term solutions because teachers just are not in the pipeline. So grow your own. You have students that are here. You might have some Asian American students. You might have some Black students that might actually want to be teachers, and we should be encouraging them, and our teachers should be encouraging them. There's other pipeline programs going on at the state level for all students of color that might want to be teachers, and so we should be piping into that. The other things I would encourage us to look at and talk about is, do we want to look at our own paraprofessionals or our bus drivers or secretaries that want to be teachers, and how could we encourage that, or other community members, and what kind of programs might you want to come into? The job fairs have not been productive looking out there, and so I'm not sure that that's going to be the best way, but what other incentives? I think the other thing is that I recently attended a Ed Week talk from Oak Park and Champaign in Illinois, who have been very successful recruiting and maintaining their teachers of color, Black, brown teachers. And one of the things is about making it a place where they want to be. And so if you start attracting your teachers, Black and brown teachers, and you make it in an environment that's culturally diverse, you make it where you honor diversity, equity, inclusion, you make it where you know that you're going to make the changes, that they want to come and they want to stay. I'm going to tell my friend that I taught here that we had groups where we could sit down and talk about our concerns as educators, that we want to change diversity inside the school system, that people will come and they will stay. And so I think making that environment is one of the things. Keeping our current teachers, I think that's something we all have to talk about. We're talking about it now in Hazel Park, and I think that's something that we all have to talk about, and what is it that environment that you're going to do to keep them here.
Mrs. Smith?
Our community has mentioned over the years that our central office is too top-heavy. We have recently brought in people within a year or less that are pretty good at what they do. How would you maintain keeping them here? And what's your thoughts on working with a team that's already in place, and how versus bringing in your own people?
Well, you're really fortunate to have some really talented people. I know of them, some of them I know, and so, you can't just come in and swipe out a team. That's not a really good practice. So you work with already, you have great systems and a great school district already in place. So, it is not my intention to come in. Would I like a couple of my people to be able to come here eventually? You might have eventual places that would come, because I work with some really wonderful people, but you have fabulous people here, I know already, and so you work with them. That's why I said you sit down, you talk about their goals, their visions, their systems they have in place, their processes for HR, your processes for business, and your processes for curriculum. How are you doing it? You're already working on your strategic plan. You have a team that's already working on that. You don't stop it. You join it, and you become a part of that. You lead as a team.
Thank you.
Mrs. Fox?
Okay. So you talked a bit about the importance of being a committed board as it relates to the implementation of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you provide for us, or can you tell us a little bit about what would be the types of action items that the board would come together cohesively in your mind that would reflect that commitment?
Absolutely. There is a action plan template for board members that I would encourage us to walk through and read together to make sure we have consensus on it. And then there is also a policy chart to walk through, and I would encourage approving that from the Midwest Equity Center, approving that policy chart. It's not only for policies, but also policies around LGBTQ and policies about bullying, and feel comfortable about that and doing that again. And then I would encourage us to read, just to make sure we're all on the same page and have a same understanding together on books. And so we could pick out a book read around equity and inclusion, maybe one that we haven't read. I bet you we all have had different readings centered around it. So maybe there's some new reads that are out there, that there's Stomp that we might want to read, or what is it that you might want to read? Some of you might have already read that as well. And so other of us are caught up fairly differently on some of our reading. And so read together and come up on that. But the Midwest Equity Center, I believe, has a lot of good items at the board level and/or have them come in and do some board training with us to build that bond forward.
So unfortunately, I've realized that we could go on. We are at our time, and we have to be fair to all of our candidates. So we do have to cut off our questioning at this time. Do you have any final remarks that you'd like to make?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for their graciousness and kindness through this whole process. I think you're really fortunate to have a fantastic board. I've had the opportunity to watch you in several meetings. I've taken that time to do that, and I think no matter which way you go, that Farmington is, I'm going to say Hazel Park again, are in fantastic hands. You know, it is an honor to be considered a candidate. You have a wonderful group of teachers, paraprofessionals, bus drivers, secretaries that are out there. It is clear. Your students are very, very fortunate to have you. The community is very, very fortunate to have you. I look forward either to be a part of it, which I certainly hope I can, and if not, I look forward to watching Farmington continue to grow. I think I shared with people that when I was an Albion student, my girlfriend lived here in Farmington Hills, and we enjoyed coming here on the weekends from Albion. And so it just is near and dear to my heart. So I wish you the very, very best of luck in search for the superintendent that really has children in their heart, diversity and equity, that will continue to carry Farmington higher and higher.
Thank you very much. We very much appreciate that, and we extremely appreciate your interest in our district.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
so much.
We will now move to our next agenda item, which is public comment. Mrs. Buckley, do we have any public comment? And so I'm going to call one more time for public comment. And seeing that we have no public comment, we will now close public comment. And unless there are any more comments from my board members, I'm looking around, I think we are adjourned. Thank you.